Episode 97 of Below the Belt in association with Boxing Social. Just quickly get the housekeeping out of the way. So iTunes reviews, always want those. Please, nice ones. Give us the 5 stars and say whatever you like. Social media, our Twitter is @belowthebelt_. Facebook page, nobody uses Facebook, but let's talk about it anyway. It's facebook.com/btbpod. And the Instagram is @belowthebeltpod. Been a little bit more active on the Instagram lately, especially in the stories and stuff like that. So head over there and give us a follow. Joined once again today by Fighting Paul Zanon. How are you, sir?
I'm good, mate. And as always, absolutely honoured to be part of your podcast, mate. Love it. Absolutely love it.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for coming on and giving us your time once again. We're coming off a bit of a shock, Paul, wasn't it? A bit of a shock this weekend. A massive shock, to be fair. Undefeated former world champion Josh Warrington losing by knockout or TKO to Mauricio Lara, who was only put into the IBF rankings when we thought he was going to be getting a world title shot. First thing I'd like to say, Paul, is actually a pretty good show overall, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? Here we are in February, and back in, we had nothing in January. There was a few little bits abroad, but to get this from Sky halfway through February was just what we needed. It was that refreshing sort of touch during a bit of a miserable period. The uncertainty of Boris Johnson not knowing what's going to happen on the 22nd of February's announcement there, and we get this. It was a bit of a how can you put it, a Valentine's weekend sort of boom, bit of dust on top. It was great. I'll be honest. I mean, not sort of putting down the Josh Warrington against Lara fight, but it was only 6 fights, but I thought they were very good. Especially for me, the best fight of the night was Lee Wood against Reece Mould. I really, really enjoyed that. Going back to our previous podcast where Luke G. Williams was on it and yourself, and we were talking about the validity of the British title. Well, again, that fight there pays testament to that. And it was a fantastic scrap. Both lads left it all in the ring. And it was great. But yeah, great card. A different sort of Wembley than we normally know. But the fireworks happened in the ring. Did the lack of crowd affect certain fighters? Maybe.
There does seem to be a lot. It feels like in this post-COVID world where there's no crowds or very small crowds, that we're having, particularly over here, we're having a lot more upsets. It does feel like that, and you'll remember our year end or our year beginning podcast when we were talking about last year and our biggest upsets, and there was a big list. There was a big list of upsets, and it does feel like that this post-COVID world where or for now where crowds aren't allowed in, that is affecting some fighters more than others, really. And I just, while we're talking about the British title, what kind of stood out to me was Lee Wood. He won the British title in a really good performance against Reece Mould, who was tough and came to win. He was undefeated and he came to win, and I actually thought he started really well, Reece Mould. But after the fight, Lee Wood saying, "I want world titles," I was a little bit gutted, because I did the same thing as you. I thought back to our podcast and us talking about the British title and how we want to see people try and win it outright. And he instantly just said, "Oh, I want a world title." It was, I don't know what you thought, Paul, but it was just a bit of a shame.
I think it's just that natural reaction. There's that thing of get me to a world title as quickly as I can because I want that financial traction as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But it's like we discussed last time. You need those essential gears to work through, and the EBU title, the Commonwealth, get those out of the way, work through those, say all the best sort of area by area, and then go for the whole globe. And so I think that was just probably a bit of emotion sort of building up in there, and that's it. Is managers, etc., they're not going to throw him in with the best of feather at the moment. That would be suicide. But what Lee should be doing at the moment is just literally reeling in the fact that he's the best of British, and think of the various other people who've held the British featherweight title, the likes of Colin McMillan, Paul Ingle, Prince Nassim, fantastic fighters. So did Nas hold it? I'm sure he did. But either way, the likes of England, Colin McMillan, etc. Great heritage in there. To be added to that list of names is great. And it's like we said last time, the lack of want to actually win the Lonsdale belt outright is unfortunately something that's needs to be reignited. So to have heard him maybe say, I'd love to do a couple of defenses, win this outright, and then go for European, Commonwealth, and then European, and then world title. So what you're saying at that point is I'm mapping out my next 4 to 5 fights, as opposed to sort of saying I'd like to get to world level and do whatever. What I don't think a lot of people realise is that if you defend that British title once and then twice, by the time you get to European, you're going to be claiming much bigger bucks than you would by going straight into European fight the next one. You start to build up that financial traction. And if you do get a world title shot, then they can organise for you to have a much better person you would just going into it next fight. There is relevance to all of it. But more importantly and fundamental is that you need these fights to become a better fighter. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And you was talking about, the European title then. I started to think about Matthew Hatton. Mm-hmm. I remember him having a really, really good run. And it was leading up to the Canelo Alvarez fight. He had a really, really good run and he was European champion. He won the European title and he was starting to put some things together. And the EBU title in particular EBU have always had a good relationship with the WBC. And if you win the EBU title, there's a chance you're going to get a good WBC ranking and you might get yourself a WBC shot. And most fighters, when you ask them, what world title do you want to fight for? What world title do you want to win? They'll say the WBC title, don't they? Despite its failings and its faults and the things that we, get upset about as media and as people that just enjoy the sport, it is the belt that people want, isn't it? And I think it's being diluted a bit now. I mean, there's a strong sort of pull towards the IBF at the moment, but then the IBF haven't done themselves any favour with sort of Europeans and all their intercontinental sort of trinkets, etc. If one of these bodies at the moment was to say we are going to have nothing but one world title, no interims, no regulars, no supers, no diamond, platinum, or tin pot versions of it, they would gain a lot of kudos and it'd just be the single belt. And I think the only one that has that is Ring Magazine. Yeah, that's true. Ring Magazine's interesting, isn't it? Because they changed kind of the way that titles are decided. They deny this, but they used to go along with the lineage. They used to go along with the lineal title. And I've seen Doug Fisher online talking about, no, we were never lineal title. We was always our own thing. But I remember quite clearly reading in the magazine about we go along with the lineal title. And I think it might have been Doug that wrote that in a letter somewhere. I'll have to dig it out, dig the magazine out. And they used to go along with the lineage and the lineal title, but now they do 1 versus 3, 2 versus 4. Like they don't exactly go along with being lineal champion, but it's still a better system than what the others have got.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I think, we're talking about the lineage here. We're kind of nerding out on that. But Mauricio Lara, he must be upset because he should be, by all rights, the lineal IBF featherweight champion after a big performance against Josh Warrington on Saturday.
I mean, we were saying before about can an empty arena, that lack of crowd, can that have an effect? Well, I was ringside in April, May 2018 Ellen Road when you had the Kaiser Chiefs playing, the whole of Leeds completely lit up, and Josh Warrington beat Lee Selby. It was definitely buzzing off that atmosphere. Who wasn't, But there's a few factors. Maybe the lack of crowd. Maybe underestimated Lara. I'm not sure. I doubt Warrington would ever do that. But for me, it's kind of like when he came out the first round, a lot of fighters will often be very tentative as they come out, to sort of paw away at their fighter and sort of, wait for them to sort of throw something to see how they're going to react to that. it's almost as if he'd never got out the pawing stage, and he tried to throw a few punches. And Lara, he's one of these guys that his timing was actually very, very good. He looked very fluid in there. And Lara fought 4 times in 2020. Whilst most fighters, did Warrington? I don't think Warrington's fought for like 18 months, has he?
16 months.
16 months. So, I mean, that's a hell of a long time not to be fighting. So, should he have had maybe a little warm-up fight before there? Probably, yeah. Just to say, okay, I can knock a guy out in 3 rounds or something. Yeah, get a bit of criticism, but I think because he's a true warrior, and he wanted to say, right, I've given up the world title for a reason, which is that I'm looking at bigger and better things. And Mauricio Lara, in essence, will be that stepping stone. Well, unfortunately, Lara's tough as hell, and he's got a heavy knockout record. And Warrington just couldn't get out of first gear. And the issue was that when he did get hit in round 4, my understanding is that he suffered a fractured jaw post-fight. And if anyone could, confirm that, it's going to be himself as a dental expert. And that's it. But I think we're all in agreement across the boxing fraternity that it should have been stopped very soon after that knockdown. I think if it had been Lara, it automatically would have been stopped. But he hung in there. He took more punishment, and in round 9 it was stopped. But Warrington is just such a lovely guy, and I don't think there was a single person on Twitter or the social media's platforms which were trying to have a go at him. It was kind of like, hope he's okay, and hope he bounces back from that, and that's it. I mean, the only other thing I can put into there is, has a bit of natural hunger disappeared from there? You've got Mauricio Lara, who has fought 4 times in 2020. I'd love to know how much he got paid for those 4 fights, and I bet you we're talking a few thousand here and there. When using the parallel of, does an empty or a full arena make a difference? For someone like Lara, who's fighting literally probably just for the money to keep the family going, and going back to Mexico, he can do a lot with that. If you cast your mind back to something like a Roberto Duran in his younger years, where the man was picking up mangoes off the street to eat, to get a bit of energy, and then going in there, and it was a case of, the person in front of me is stopping my next meal. If I don't knock them out, then I'm not going to eat. And there's probably a bit of that in Lara, which was, I've got absolutely nothing to lose here. If I get knocked out, then I get knocked out. And he probably also weighed up the fact that Warrington's not the biggest of punchers, and he stood there, and Warrington uncharacteristically kind of glued himself to the telephone box with Lara, and it was a matter of time before he was going to get tagged. So I really hope Warrington's able to bounce back from this. Will he now give his dad the elbow as a trainer? There's a lot of speculation that I'm not sure. It's a very strong bond between them. In recent times, there's been a few trainers and boxers who have departed after long-term relationships, the likes of Daniel Dubois with Martin Bowers, albeit Bowers will continue to manage and organise his fights. But sometimes the first person that gets shot is the trainer. Was it the trainer's fault here? Could have been the trainer's fault that he didn't get pulled out earlier. Was it the trainer's fault that Warrington lost? I think there's a bit more to that discussion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you were just talking about there. You said perhaps could Josh Warrington have had a tune-up fight. I think this was the tune-up fight, Paul.
Yeah.
I think this was seen as the tune-up fight. This is a guy who's, was 21-2. Had been, like you said, boxing guy. Last guy he boxed was 28-10, 16-6-2 before that. This is a guy that hadn't boxed at a high level at all. This was the tune-up. He was supposed to be fighting Kanzu in a unification fight for the WBA and IBF featherweight championships of the world. This was just a ticking over the fight, maybe a defense. I think he wanted it to be a defense, but then the IBF had told him, yeah, you can defend it against, him, Mauricio Lara, we'll rank him for you, but you then got to fight Kid Galahad again. And he didn't want to do that. And so this just became a tune-up and a payday for Josh Warrington. Is there one thing that did come to my mind with Josh Warrington is this is the first time in a while where he's faced a banger, where he's faced anyone with a bit of pop. And he wouldn't have known that because 15 stoppages from 21 is good, But you look at the level that Mauricio Lara was boxing at, and you think, oh yeah, but 15 stoppages at that level is nothing for me to worry about. Do you think there's anything to be said about that Josh Warrington hadn't faced a puncher in a while? Lee Selby, not a puncher, probably a bit dead at the weight as well. Carl Frampton, not a natural featherweight. Kid Galahad, not a puncher at all. Hadn't faced anyone with any real pop in a long time. Do you think there's anything to be said about that?
Yeah, I mean, Frampton had certainly had some sting to him, but wasn't. I'm not sure, natural featherweight compared to his earlier days. I think one of the issues with fighting against Lara is that this was the second time Lara had actually ever fought out of Mexico. He only ever fought once out in Argentina against Eduardo Estela, and he stopped the bloke there and knocked him out. But I mean, if I sort of tell you his two losses, one was against Elliot Chavez in the Holiday Inn in Vitoria de Durango in Mexico, and the other one was his debut against Julio Carabino, where he lost a split decision. Everyone else, I could reel the names off, and you'd be like, who, literally all the way through. And so I think there was probably an element of, we can't find a lot on this guy, but listen, all his fights have been in Mexico, so it's hard to determine when you have 15 out of 21 knockouts, the opposition he's been in. So they've probably looked down this list of Mexicans and gone, nah, I don't really know any of these guys, so I think we're quite safe here. Josh can, stay behind his jab, land his punches, do what he does best, which is, sort of grind out a very convincing point decision. That was it. But from the very beginning, his feet seemed a bit cemented. He didn't have that sort of like bang, 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 and then move off in angles type sort of scenario that he'd had previously. He seemed a bit off, and I don't know if that was motivation. I don't know if it's that because he's got a few quid in his pocket now. The hunger is not as big as it was going back to, say, against Selby, where he could have had King Kong in the ring that night, and there's a good chance he probably would have done a number on them. But against Lara, maybe the motivation to really be up for it, especially after 18 months, wasn't there. And there's lots of pictures of him with his twins, and you can see the love he's got for his family. He's absolutely phenomenal. So I'm not saying he's become a bit softer since getting a few quid in his pocket and being world champion for a while, but there maybe was an element of the hunger accelerator maybe being pulled back a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, he's got a few quid in his pocket, and there's always the famous Marvin Hagler quote about it's hard to get up at 5 a.m. to go running when you're sleeping on silk sheets. And I think perhaps it is one of those for Josh, really. Maybe it was the weight. Maybe he's outgrown the weight now. He hadn't made weight in 16 months, and maybe he just didn't make it right. Maybe he didn't make the weight right, because even before the initial knockdown, he didn't look right. Like you said, he didn't see himself. He was landing some good shots on Lara. Lara wasn't hard to find. But I think the thing with Lara as well was he was completely unorthodox. He was a bit square on, wasn't he? And he wasn't hard to find, but he was very square on, but he would switch a little bit, and you didn't know where the shots were going to come from.
If I was a manager, promoter, etc., and people started pulling names out, if I'm talking like Apollo Creed against, going through the directory here and then sort of going Italian Stallion, that's the one we want. He's from Philadelphia. He's got nothing to him. He's lost half of his fights. To be like, yeah, that's a sensible thing. For me, going down the list and picking a 9-stone Mexican, this is their territory all day long, all century long. We can go through a whole host of them. Manuel Medina, etc., etc., etc. Barrera and Morales have both worked for this division as well. It's a very dangerous division to be mixed in with Mexicans. They have pretty much run the roost on this for many years. So to go in against an unknown one with a heavy-handed record, albeit against people we don't know, I think there was certainly an underrated risk in there. And I would say it's not a rematch they should be looking for at any time.
No, I don't think so. I think he should probably look to move up, maybe, because he wasn't a puncher. He's not a puncher at feather. So if he moves up to super feather, he might have to hold, a bit more power. But I think that's the only thing I can think of, because like we've already discussed, he didn't look right, really. And you talk about, perhaps unknown Mexicans. And I wanted to ask, actually, I'll ask you the question now. Our friend Chris Williamson put a question on Twitter about tune-up fights that went wrong. Any that come to mind?
Okay, Roberto Duran against the gifted one, Kirkland Lang. Yeah, that couldn't have gone any worse. Lang literally just let his arms go like a Nintendo Wii. He was doing absolutely every single move he wanted to on there, and looking good at it. Other tune-up fights, my goodness.
I've got one or two. Just while you have a think, Paul. We were talking. You mentioned then about unknown Mexicans and things like that, and it made me think of Carl Frampton versus Alejandro Gonzalez Jr., who was the chap that dropped him twice in the first round, and it was on the same night that Scott Quigg stopped Kiko Martinez. I think Carl Frampton, I think he was boxing in Texas or something like that, and Scott Quigg was fighting in Manchester around the same time. And I think Gonzalez was ranked like the 16th best super bantamweight in Mexico or something. Like he had no kind of, the matchmaker looks at and said, yeah, he'll do. He's tough Mexican, but you'll look good against him. Another one that kind of the very first one that came to mind when I saw that question that Chris posted on Twitter, and it's not too niche. It's Nobuhiro Ishida, who was the chap that stopped James Kirkland in a round. After dropping him 3 times. I don't know if you remember him. And I think he ended up getting a fight against Gennady Golovkin in the end. I think he had boxed all the way up to heavyweight in the end, Ishida. But that was the one that came to mind because Kirkland was undefeated. He was undefeated. He'd had a bit of a break. He'd come back. He'd had 2 years off. He'd come back and he gets stopped by Ishida, who was nobody. He was absolutely nobody. He was 22-6 at the time, and he stopped James Kirkland in a round. Any more that come to mind, Paul?
Yeah, the only other one I remember was I remember going through the story with Jimmy Tibbs, and it was Jumbo Cummings when Frank Bruno fought against Floyd Cummings, not Jumbo Cummings, Floyd right. Cummings, and it was at the Royal Albert Hall, and in the first round, so Cummings had served 6-7 years in prison, just come out. I think it was a matter of weeks or months prior, and wanted to get back into the heavyweight circuit. And it's at Royal Albert Hall. And first round, Cummings tags Bruno, who at the time was like about 18-0 or something. And Bruno was on his feet, and Terry Lawler screamed out to Jimmy Tibbs, like, "Get in there!" So Jimmy's literally run over and put his arms under Frank, who was completely dead upright, static. A feather literally could have knocked him over. And they're in there sort of like, chucking water on him and flapping his arms around. And thankfully, Frank managed to sort of weather the storm and come back and win the fight. But that was as near to a banana skin that Frank could have had that earlier on in his career. It was almost that turnaround fight. There's quite a few fights I think we can think of where there's been world championship defenses where we thought, it's going to be an easy one and walk over and whatever else. And then it's turned the other way. I mean, Buster Douglas, I guess, was one of them. Hasim Rahman, you could say, was another. But in terms of tune-up fights, there's I'd have to. That's almost a book in itself to be written. It's crikey, Ken Norton against Muhammad Ali. I think their first fight was a tune-up fight to an extent, wasn't it? I don't think it was a sanctioned world title fight. There's certainly a few out there. That's almost a pod on itself. The banana skins,
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right there. That's a pod all on its own. So you said about Josh Warrington and what he might do next. What do you think he will do next?
I think he needs to spend some time with his family. I think there was those words that he put from his kids saying, I don't want you to fight or get hit or whatever it was. And maybe those things are starting to echo in his head now. And I remember speaking to Jeff Fennick, interviewing him a while back. And he was saying, and Ray Mancini, that's the other one. And both of them, especially Ray Mancini, said to me, he said, Paul, he says, when you have a couple of kids, he says, the hunger and that lack of fear, he says, goes in the other direction. He said, you become so fearful of getting hit because you're worried that you might not work out the ring with all your facets in place. And he said, and then he says, you then worry about the rest of the family. He says, whereas when you're single and, very stupid. Is you go in there and he says, and you're willing to put everything not only on the line but beyond it. And with Warrington now, I don't know. I think need to spend some time sort of looking at himself, literally speaking to the man in the mirror, working out, is the hunger still there? If so, does he want to continue at that level? Maybe he want to step straight into lightweight and have a rematch with Lee Selby. I don't know. Maybe they could go for a British or European title or something, who knows? But it'd be a shame if Josh Warrington walks away from the sport, because as a person, he's unbelievably nice. I really hope that when he stops fighting, in his boxing career, that he stays within boxing in a massive way, because he's got the character and a great story to be able to inspire so many generations. And I believe that he could do so much at grassroots level throughout the whole of the UK. So that's a wide picture. In terms of his, what he does for his next fight, I don't know. That's purely going to depend on him. If he comes back all guns blazing and he's, we get the old Warrington back in again, then maybe a tune-up fight and then go for that world title. But otherwise, not sure. Based on his last fight, you won't want him anywhere near a world title at the moment.
No, I think he's got a bit of rebuilding to do before he comes back and tries to box for a world title again. We were talking earlier on about the referee's performance. Howard Foster, who's normally one of Britain's more. He's the guy to jump in a second too early than a second too late, isn't he? Famously, George Groves against Carl Froch won, at the MEN. One of the more controversial stoppages in modern boxing history, that one. And then in the fourth round, I'll tell you what I did, because I do it all the time. This I'm going to give you everybody an insight into what I do when I watch boxing and I want somebody to get stopped. I'm going to try and do an impression of it. Referee, for fuck's sake! That was me on Saturday night screaming at Howard Foster to stop that fight, because it's funny me doing the impression, but it's scary to see a fighter getting fucking knocked around the ring like that. It reminded me straight away of Nathan Cleverly against Sergey Kovalev in Wales. Yeah. He was fucked, Nathan Cleverly, and so was Josh Warrington, and he should have been stopped. What did you think about Howard Foster's performance during the fight? Should
have been stopped. I don't know. Does Howard go back and look at the fight afterwards and think that was a bad decision for myself, something I need to work on? I don't know. From the television perspective, I was in the same sort of school of thought, which was stop the bloody fight. And he was only a few feet away, and he would have been seeing the expression on Warrington's face of, getting hit into outer space. Should have been stopped there. Is he to blame that the fight carried on? I think you've got to say yes. He is the referee. But was it the trainer's responsibility to maybe throw in the towel as well? So I think there's a bit of joint responsibility there. Warrington was never going to quit. He was always, he's going to go out, either get carried out or stopped by the referee. I don't think his dad was ever going to throw the towel in. He was never going to stop, and that's a bit of a dangerous combination. So down to Howard, then unfortunately I hate to use the word, but the blame has to go in his direction, not in total percentage, but the majority weighing.
I was interested I think the Association of Boxing Commission say only the referee can stop the fight. That's the rule. So if a towel comes in, the referee can throw it out and say we're carrying on. But that never happens. That almost never happens. The only time I can think of it was that Miguel Cotto fight when he did it. Yuri Foreman. That's the only time I can think of where someone's given the towel back. Oh, Mickey Van did it as well, didn't he? Famously in the Alex Arthur, was it? Against somebody that I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's not Willie Limon, it's somebody else. But it doesn't happen when the towel comes in. The fight's over, isn't it? And I just kind of felt that he didn't look right in the corner pretty much from that moment on. I think he was concussed. I think he probably had a concussion after that knockdown, because it was a heavy knockdown in the 4th round.
Yeah,
And
no,
took
he
some
was scrambled.
big shots.
He certainly didn't get back from there. Again, coming back to Jimmy Tibbs, I remember Jimmy once sort of saying to me, he was trying to get whichever fight it was, he was trying to get the referee's attention, and sort of, and I think he'd either thrown a towel or he's waving it, sort of basically say, let's stop this. And so in the end, the only way he was able to sort of like get it stopped was, I think it might have been with Mark Kaler, and he literally just he climbed in the ring, and the referee, which you're not supposed to do, and the referee gave him a right mouthful, and he was sort of like, he apologised. He knew what he was doing, but it was basically saying, I want to take care of my fighter. I want to make sure that they can go back to their family, be safe, and that's it. And there's a big responsibility on the trainer. They know their fighter, they know their sort of like thresholds, but also they also know they're human beings, and they can get buzzed with a punch at the temple or the jaw, which can completely scramble their senses. And that happened. And trainer and referee, I don't think fulfilled their full due diligence on that night, and neither did the judges. That's another one for us to leapfrog onto.
Yes, let's do it right now. Let's do it right now, Paul. So,
right.
Talking about our elite British officials that we have. Actually, first things first, I just need to point out that it was quite scary to me that the Josh Warrington-Mauricio-Lara fight had 3 British judges and a British referee. But we'll move swiftly on to Zelfa Barrett versus Kiko Martinez, which ended in a unanimous decision win for Zelfa Barrett. You had it quite close, didn't you, Paul? I didn't, but you.
I had Martinez winning the fight. Absolutely. Yep. I had him winning by about 3 rounds.
Okay.
Now,
fairly comfortable.
I was watching a lot of the pundits, and it's incredible as he got to like the last couple of rounds where Zelfa kind of woke up and started letting his hands go, and he looked good at doing so. That all of a sudden it was kind of like, no names mentioned, but they were there sort of going, with this in mind now, I think I've kind of got Barrett around the head. Whereas like you're thinking, hold a minute, like 3 rounds before you were saying that Barrett's going to need a knockout here. I'm confused, So for me, from about round 3, I think on Twitter, I was basically saying that Barrett's got a lovely jab, but he needs to do something more than just a jab. He needs to sort of, punches in bunches and then sort of move, etc., to clock up the points, because it wasn't going to knock out Martinez with just that one punch. And he's got those lovely rangy arms in his, and he can be silky smooth. But Zelfa just didn't get into the fight until about round 10. And by then, for me, it was too late. So when I suddenly saw the scorecards, 118, 111 times 2, I thought, this is just absolutely disgraceful. Really, I mean, it's anybody who somehow managed to sort of rationalise those scores just needs to support a different sport. It's just ridiculous. You could tell Barrett was a bit deflated. Fair play to Eddie Hearn sort of saying, I think, Zelfa nicked it by a round. I think that's probably Hearn's way. Whether he's being truthful about that or not, maybe that's his way of saying it was a bloody close fight and it could have gone either way. But he said I had him by a round. But the majority had Kiko Martinez winning it, and that's what the feeling on Twitter was. And for the unsilent majority in there, were quite vocal about that. So that was a very, very bad shadow to be cast upon British judges, and it's going to make people not want to come and fight in the UK if you're going to get those sort of decisions. For Martinez, that could have been a springboard fight to get him back into world title contention. But for Barrett, I don't know where that sort of moves him forward to now. Yes, it adds another win to his record, but it's one that people will say you didn't really beat Kiko Martinez. I'd have liked to have seen Zelfa Barrett, the version we saw in the last 3 rounds, have gone from the get-go. Zelfa's got a great engine. He's got a lovely jab, and he does actually have good footwork. He just didn't bloody use it on Saturday. And if he can put all that together and bite down in his gum shield, then listen, he showed that he can take a punch. He can be silky smooth. The question is, why wasn't he doing it for the first 75% of the fight? He'll kick himself about it afterwards. So maybe that is one for a rematch. Maybe that is one where he can show his redemption and bag all his skills together, unleash his full toolkit on Martinez, and then sort of win it definitively with a different set of judges, ones which maybe not related to the family or something. It was just ridiculous. It really was. And like I said, Zelfa Barrett is an absolutely lovely, lovely man. It's a real gentleman out the ring. He was probably a bit embarrassed with the score, to say the least. But I'm sure that he wants to get back in there and do it as well. We obviously, you want the British fighter to win. Absolutely, I wanted Barrett to win. I wanted him to sort of win convincingly against a former world champion, but it didn't happen. And yes, he won, not convincingly, and could have easily gone the other way. So yeah, the judges were shit, to say the least. And they should, we're talking before about looking at the person in the mirror. They should look in the mirror and say, "You're a shit judge. Step away from it." As simple as that. I would love to know. I would love to have those guys, the ones that did 118, 111, sitting in front of a TV and go, right, we're going to sit through this round together. How did you give that one to Zelfa, and that one, and that one, and that one? And literally watch their eyes, and maybe sort of like hook them up to one of those lie detectors and say, you honestly thought he won that fight, and you see it going woo woo as it bounces up and down. So disgraceful.
It was atrocious scoring. We've got a real problem in this country with our officials. It's the same 7 or 8 that do every fight from Southern Area title level up to world title. They do everything, and they would have refereed or scored Zelfa Barrett's fights his entire career, and it's far too familiar. And you can imagine that Steve Gray and Bob Williams, who were doing the score, who scored it 118, 111, probably didn't take their eyes off Zelfa Barrett. They probably never watched Kiko Martinez. They probably just watched Zelfa Barrett the entire time. And it's a classic thing that judges do. I remember there was a famous picture of Adelaide Bird watching Canelo Alvarez in one of her because she was just watching Canelo. She wasn't watching Triple G. And it's such a novice thing to do that, and I wouldn't be surprised if our officials were doing that. It's not good enough, and it's not good enough for Robert Smith to come out and say, "Well, I'm not listening to you lot because you were up drinking cans at midnight." That's completely fucking unacceptable. We need to be better, and Eddie Hearn's right. People aren't going to want to come over here. We have become what we thought Germany was all those years ago. We used to talk about needing a knockout to get a draw. That's us. That's us in Britain now. People don't want to come here no more to have fucking Steve Gray and Howard Foster have a complete balls up of the scorecards. It's just unacceptable. And for me, there's not a world where I could find 7 rounds for Zelfa Barrett in that fight. There's not a world. He probably won 4 rounds. I had it 116, 112. Kiko Martinez walked him down. He walked him down a super bantamweight, a man still ranked by the WBA as a super bantamweight, 2 divisions below, walked him down. And to come off the judges, it made me worry about Zelfa Barrett a little bit. It did make me worry. He was dabbing at his cut. He looked worried. It was like he didn't know what to do. He looked like a bit of a lost kid in there at times. In the corner, he seemed fine. And after the fight, he seemed fine. But he worried me, and I thought to myself, is this for you, mate? Because this guy's much smaller than you, and he's not 34. Let's have it right. Kiko Martinez is probably 43, not 34. Somebody's got it mixed up, and it worried me about Zelfa Barrett. And if he comes back and knocks out Kiko Martinez in a rematch, then fair enough, I'll take it all back. But he worried me. It made me think, and I did tweet it off the Below the Belt account, is this game for you, mate? Because he just seemed a bit lost in there, Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to see the rematch. Like I said, I think Zelfa, if he can go in with the killer instinct, he almost needs sort of to be told when the bell goes to the first round, you're in the 10th round. You're in the 10th round, and you've got to win this and do exactly what he did, because he kind of got shook up, or he shook himself up towards the last sort of 2-3 rounds, and he had a much better fight, and like I said, he had some lovely lateral movement after throwing 3 or 4 punches, and that's how he was going to win the fight. But staying behind the jab on someone, like you said, who's 2 divisions below you, and he had some lovely little pathways, Martinez, where he was sort of like step, bang, I'm in range, and let the hands go. And it was working. And he was throwing some lovely little feints and then throwing the hook, and it was catching Barrett to the jaw. Thankfully, Barrett was able to sort of like sway back and ride the punch a little bit, so he wasn't getting the full brunt of it. But if he's going to have a rematch, and I hope he does, and I hope that he's able to literally tip-tap his way to a beautiful technical victory, then that will, everything will be forgiven. We're not talking about like Warrington against Lara. That's a fight Warrington doesn't need, and it would not be in his interest to take. This would be in his interest to take, and if he can not make an example of Martinez, but basically put to bed any stupid judges' decisions sort of from previous, it will give him a hell of a lot of kudos, and it'll also give us a bit of confidence as well that with a different set of judges that Zelfa doesn't need that assistance, because he'd be the first one to say, I can fight, I don't need that crap, So yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. I think hopefully they make a rematch. Kiko Martinez deserves it. He deserves the rematch. He deserves the opportunity to put it right, and he deserves to have neutral judges there. We're able to fly fighters in. Let's fly a couple of judges in, from that aren't from England, because our ones just aren't up to it, to be honest. So let's give Kiko a fair shake, because he's been a good servant to the game. And he deserves it. He deserves a fair shake, and he deserves a rematch and another payday. Let's move. That was a good show, though, wasn't it? We both agreed that was a good.
Oh yeah,
a good introduction back to, other than the controversies, it was a good night of boxing, really. And it first came on, and I was a bit Blair, but then once it got going, I thought, what, this is all right. But going into this week, Paul, we've got another pretty good show. 2 years too late, or perhaps not too late, perhaps it's the right time. Josh Kelly against David Avanesyan. I've said it the wrong way around, because Avanesyan is the champion, and so I should have said him first. Avanesyan against Josh Kelly for the EBU welterweight championship. You excited for it, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Avanesyan is he's a top 10. He's a top 10 fighter. And when you look at who's sort of like, I guess, from 10 to 20, you've got Josh Kelly at the sort of bottom end of that sort of 20 range. Within that sort of other 10 there, you've got the likes of Virgil Ortiz Jr., Morris Hooker, Kell Brook, Abel Ramos. But Avanesyan is in that top 10, which then puts him amongst the likes of Jesse Vargas, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Mikey Garcia, Terence Crawford, and obviously Errol Spence Jr. It's a very, very tasty division. So Josh Kelly against Avanesyan. It's a risky fight for Josh. Let's be honest. I was lucky to interview Adam Booth last year around this time, actually, and for the defunct Boxing Monthly magazine. And I saw Josh on the pads, and I saw him sort of walking around the ring, getting instructions from Adam Booth. And I've got to say, he's a very, very silky smooth fighter, and he trains his ass off. I mean, he was dripping in sweat, but he wasn't breathing heavy. He's really in shape. I mean, he's a real credit to the sport. I think he won the Young Fighter of the Year Boxing Writers Club award a few years back. I think I was there for that one. And he's someone who's a credit to the sport, and he's done very well in his division so far. This is going to be a very big test for him. Very, very big indeed. I think if we're talking about Josh's future plans, I think they could literally hinge on this, because if he doesn't beat Avanesyan, then a lot of people are going to say, well, he's just domestic level. Let's see how he sort of goes on from there. And then there's going to be a case of who can he fight? Maybe Kell Brook, maybe Amir Khan, do it that way. But if he does beat Avanesyan, then obviously the next step they're going to be talking about is those world title fights. And it's going to be stateside for Josh Kelly. And I mean, that's the thing. If you look at Josh, he's in terms of the only time he did go out and fight in America, he had the draw, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and
against Ray Robinson.
That's it, yeah. And that was, it was a good fight. It was a good learning fight for Josh. But if we've got to be honest, it wasn't the best version of Josh Kelly. So I'm really excited with this fight. You've got the classic, excuse me. You've got the classic, I guess, boxer versus technical wizard here. It's two real contrasting styles. East versus West in terms of Europe. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Adam Booth, I really, really rate as a boxing trainer, as a person as well. I think he's got a lot to him. And everyone he's trained, I've always enjoyed watching how he sort of guided them to world titles, and I think he's going to do the same with Josh Kelly. But this is going to be the acid test.
It is. It's tough. It's a tough fight. Avanesyan is a tough man. Not boxed in a while. They've both been really inactive. Both of them have been really, really inactive. But it's a really, really tough fight for Josh Kelly. And I was just looking at the betting odds earlier on because I was speaking to somebody from Matchroom, and I said to him, who's the favourite? And he said, Avanesyan's the favourite. And I've just looked just now, and Josh Kelly has moved into being favourite now. He's 6-4 on as the bookie's favourite for this fight. It's tight. Avanesyan's 11-10.
Yeah.
So it's very tight. It's very, very tight. I don't think there's much value either way, really. I think you need a stoppage, really. We agreed that we're not expecting Josh Kelly to get a stoppage.
Avanesyan is your typical iron-jawed, teak tough fighter. It kind of reminds me a little bit like when Alex Dilmagani went in against Samir, and Dilmagani certainly had much better technical ability. He got caught up in a bit of a tear-up in there. If he hadn't have done that, I think he'd have won it on his lovely silky boxing skills. And I think that's what Josh Kelly needs to do on this fight, is stay behind those boxing skills and keep that movement, keep those punches, not get too greedy with the punches, the 1-2s and hooks, jabbing off the hook, trying to irritate Avanesyan, laying a few traps and making it his fight. But if he decides to sort of go in there and turn it into a war, that's not a good idea for him. It really isn't. And that's the sort of fight Avanesyan would absolutely relish. He would gladly go 200 rounds just standing in a phone booth with you.
Yeah, this is a man that's not worried about getting hit. This is a man that's been hit by big punches and kept coming. He's only got one stoppage loss, and that was to the Mean Machine, Terence Crawford, former Terence Crawford opponent. I'm not going to try and say his surname.
No, I've seen that one as well. So anyone who's listening who's listening to the podcast who fancies being able to pronounce that one correctly, please get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Avanesyan's going to be there. He's going to be there to be found all night. I think Josh Kelly who's going to benefit more? Who's going to be hurt less, I guess, from the layoff, from the layoff that both of them have had? I remember speaking to Scott from Matchroom and saying, why isn't Josh Kelly boxed? On one of the podcasts we did before. And he said, I think it's been about crowd. It's been about COVID. It's been about a lot of different things. And I think that's going to be interesting to see which one of them is more affected by the long layoff or not. What's your gut feeling? Who are you expecting to win?
Ooh. I know it sounds silly, but I always say this about the fights. I can usually tell in the first round how 95% is gonna pan out. If Kelly goes in there light-footed and is working the silky boxing skills, I'm gonna go with him on points.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to agree. I think he may just win it on points. I don't think the layoff is going to affect him as much as it's going to affect Avanesyan, at 32. I think, and I've said this before, location's massive. I think location's a big thing. It's not as big as it normally is because there's no crowd, but I think it's, I think just having the location may just tip it in Josh Kelly's favour. So I agree with you. I think he may just win a decision on this one.
There almost seems to be a common theme here that if your first name's Josh or Joshua, that you're coming off layoffs. So you got Josh Warrington, didn't end well. Joshua Buatsi, 400 days not fighting. It did end well, but he got rocked, and then came back and won it against a tough Eastern European with a phenomenal amateur background. And then now we've got the next Josh, who's had a very long layoff. So mentally, how strong is he going in there with Adam Booth behind him? He's one of the best sort of sports psychologists to a better extent to have in his corner. I would like to think he will have him mentally primed as well as he would physically. So let's hope he can go in there with a technical ability and grind this one out with some enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we wrap up, Paul, I wanted to ask you about the other big fight this weekend, which is one I am really, really excited about, which is, in my opinion, the best super featherweight in the world, which is Miguel Berchelt taking on Oscar Valdez. Are you looking forward to that? Miguel Berchelt for me is like he's like the Box Nation fighter, because that's how I was introduced to him, watching him on Box Nation, because they got all the top rank cards. Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love Oscar Valdez. It's funny because I was chatting with Liam Williams the other day, who again, that's another sort of talking point there. Is he's now got the fight with Andrade sorted out. But we chatted briefly kind of after the interview about Oscar Valdez, and he was saying he's a big fan of his. He's a real come forward fighter, and he's got a real grit to him. And Berchelt is he's a big, strong, 130-pound fighter. But there's a lot of respect between the two of them there. You see, like Berchelt was in the ring after Valdez's last fight, and he was there sort of congratulating him stuff, and it was a lot of hugging and smiles and whatever else. Those are two very well-mannered guys, but you stick both of those guys in the ring, and I think we can have fireworks here. They've got the potential to turn it into a Barrera Morales style fight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an absolute cracker. What's your gut feeling? Who do you fancy for it?
I'm going to go for Oscar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go for Oscar. I know that Berchelt's probably more sort of the bookie's favourite, but Oscar Valdez for me, I think, is going to go in there, and he's going to go in a la Johnny Tapia and just do it from all angles. Yeah.
I fancy Miguel Berchelt. I think it's just because I'm just such a massive fan of his. I think he's a classic boxer puncher. He's a really, really good boxer, but he's also got a nice bit of pop about him. 33 knockouts and 37 wins. I think Berchelt's going to win. I think he's the best super featherweight in the world. I think Valdez, coming up from feather, I think he perhaps gives up a lot of his, some of his physical advantages that he enjoyed at featherweight, going up to Berchelt's weight class. I fancy Berchelt inside the distance, TKO 9, something like that.
Nice. Yeah, no, I'll go with Valdez, like I said, but I think however long the fight lasts, whether it be 3 rounds, 9, or the full distance, I think it's going to be one where if you want to take a pee, you do it in between the round. You definitely don't do it during one of the 3-minute sessions.
You keep a bottle on your lap and you just.
That's the prudent approach. Yeah. Obviously, have a good sort of 2-litre capacity bottle ready to go.
Yeah. You piss jugs on deck.
There we go. I think we should be charging extra for sort of television fight tips for the fans that are listening there. Like, you know what I mean? Snacks. Always make sure you got your snacks close. That you don't have to overreach. And now we're talking about sort of toilet habits that can be done ringside in front of the TV. So obviously if you're in a group, might have to sort of change the dynamic a little bit there. So but yeah, that's another podcast to be had right there.
It is absolutely. All right then, thank you so much for your time, Paul, and I'll talk to you very, very soon.
Absolutely, mate. Thank you for having me on, Cal, and I look forward to catching up for another blockbuster.
All right, take care.
Superb.